Hello, Divorce and Beyond family. I've got some exciting news because we have teamed up with Headspace to guide you toward better mental health. With Headspace's meditation, mindfulness tools, and mental health support, you're set for a journey to a happier, healthier you. And there's more because if you sign up through our exclusive link, you'll enjoy 2 weeks of Headspace membership for free. So don't miss out on this opportunity to embrace your well-being. You can check out the show notes for the link or just go to divorcebeyond.com/headspace-Susan. And you'll be able to start your path to peace and joy today. This is just one more way that we can support you on your journey to a better beyond.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
To help my clients kind of navigate through that on the financial side, I came up with an acronym and I call it the DAM method. And I'm like, dodging the disclosure, right? How many times have we seen that? Avoiding getting assets valued and then misrepresenting the information. There's times when all three of those things are happening, and it's making it very challenging for the women to determine if what's being proposed is a good option.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. And today, listeners, this is an interesting one because I feel like I have an old friend with us because I have known Rhonda for so long, and I see her in my Instagram feed every single day. We are related through other friends all the time, but I've never actually managed to get her on the show. So I'm absolutely delighted to have leading financial expert on, Rhonda Noordyk. Rhonda, thank you so much for joining me finally.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I am really grateful to be here.
It has been a long time coming. We have talked about doing this episode for a long time. It seems an obvious match. You're the founder and CEO behind the Women's Financial Wellness Center. You're a podcast host yourself. I love the name of your podcast, Disrupting Divorce. Isn't that, that makes us friends under the skin, because that's what we're all trying to do, disrupting divorce, conversations for women. And you've got a new money journal coming out. I just launched my business journal for my business clients and in my other world away from divorce. And so I know the value of journals in helping us to get organized, get a handle on things. So I'm very excited to have you tell us about that. And today we're going to dive into a topic that I know is sort of really the wind beneath your wings, the reason you do what you do. I'm calling it Women and Money. The struggle is real, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to leave our male partners out of this, but for some reason for women, money and finance can be an additional struggle. So I'm super excited to be diving into this. So again, thank you for joining us. And, maybe let's start there. Why is there such a struggle for women around the topic of finances and money?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, for me, it comes down to a lack of financial confidence. And I think the key thing there is it's not because women aren't smart enough, right? It's really because the formula for confidence around money is knowledge and experience. And so if you have the knowledge without the experience, it's theory. If you have the experience without the knowledge, it's trial and error. And you're like, okay, well, that isn't working, right? But when you get those two things working together, it really becomes, almost magical, right? In a really short period of time, how women can show up to these conversations that they've been avoiding for years, sometimes decades, or the narrative that their spouse has told them about, don't worry about it, right? Or, we got it covered. Or in some extreme cases, here's your allowance, right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Painful.
Gut punch there.
Yes.
I'm like, oh.
It's really challenging. And I think, my work has always been, so, prior to me starting my company in 2014, which it's kind of crazy to think I'm like knocking on the door of my 10-year anniversary. But prior to that, I had been in the financial industry. And one of the biggest challenges as we were doing women's events and we would have, standing room only, and women were like, yes, this is amazing. And I'm learning some very practical things that I can take back and apply. And then, their spouse would kind of poo-poo it or, not take it serious. And it was kind of like, yeah, well, at the end of the day, Rhonda, I only have so much energy. And so I'm going to focus on, the things that I can control over here and just kind of deal with it. Right. And it was a lot of those same women that then found themselves in a situation where they were looking at potentially getting divorced and really now having to be thrown into this conversation about money that many of them had been avoiding for a long time.
Well, and that's such a good point that you make there, because it is a conversation that women in particular, since we're focusing there, but I can say, one, we're not generally socialized as children, young girls, to have difficult conversations around finances, to be educated in financial literacy, et cetera, right? So it's something that we're kind of conditioned from the beginning to leave to the others to manage and handle. And then you, as you just said, right, you find yourself in this position where divorce is in your future. And that immediately throws you into a tailspin of emotions, usually fear is a part of it. And combine that with the fact that you don't have that financial literacy, exponentially the fear goes higher, right? Because that's one of the biggest fears we know for people around money is not having enough, not understanding it. So where do they even begin? I know you've mentioned knowledge and experience. Where right now we're probably talking, or people who are listening don't have much of either.
I think the question that I always will ask is, okay, what's the next best thing that you can be doing? Because I think sometimes we think, okay, well, I need to go from here to, being the expert and I need to do it by tomorrow, right? And so it's like, okay, yeah, but what's the next best thing? And I think sometimes it's being around people that can help you navigate through that. The tricky part though, and you've probably experienced this too, over the last decade, is now there's so much information. So we went from having very little information around the financial related to divorce conversation to there being almost, a plethora of information. And now people are having to find themselves navigating through that piece of it. So I often like to see myself as somebody who's curating that. I'm like, okay, you've got a question about an app, you've got a question about a process, you've got a question about, but I've researched those things and I'm going to curate that down to say, okay, yes, no, maybe.
Hey, there's huge value in that, right? Because you're right. And you're right. I have experienced it. So one of the reasons why, I do this podcast is, I one of the things that's very important to me is to bring information to people that they can trust. Because as you just pointed out, right, there's so much information out there. There's such a plethora, and not all of it is as good as other information or advice or education. But what you're pointing out, I think, is really critical for people to understand is there's two things that people tend to do when they're afraid, right? One, I call ostrich syndrome, which is they just stick their head in the ground, even if it's I'll deal with it tomorrow, or I'll let someone else handle it, which is something we see in the divorce world quite a bit. Or they turn and they try to learn. But again, yes, there's just almost too much information out there to get that knowledge that you're talking about. Yeah. So how do you help people, even, where do you send them to go find, or how do you work with people to give them that knowledge?
So there's a couple things. One of the things that I developed when I first started my business 10 years ago was something that now has a name. At the time, you're like, okay, I'm just kind of like,
I'm winging it.
I'm winging it, right? I mean, we had great success in winging it. And since then we can refine it and whatever, right?
Yeah.
But no, we've tested and measured what I'm now calling my bridge method. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, we want to be looking at what that next best thing is. And I have very much focused on, okay, what's the result? What is the outcome? And, my intention is never, hey, we're just going to come in and take the guys out at the knees. And, I had a client who I was working with. She said, I don't care if my husband's homeless. And I said, we're going to part ways, because I'm not getting behind that. So I am very much an advocate for women, but I don't hate men. So I think that's an important,
Right.
that's an important piece of it. But we have such a disparity that we have to try to figure out how to level the playing field. And so one of the things that we'll start with is, okay, breathe and build your team. And there's been a lot of conversation about building your team and who that is. And my philosophy is you need an essential team. You need legal, financial, emotional in some form. You can dial it up, dial it down, depending on your situation. But then you have these add-on layers, right? And it's mortgage and real estate and business valuation and forensic, all of those things. But not everybody might need that. So we look at, okay, what is the potential return on investment if you invest in some of these other things? And we've been very intentional about helping our clients make good decisions around what direction to go. Because I think a lot of times the attorneys will say, oh, you don't want to go down that path, it's too expensive. Well, my client could have just left 7 figures on the table because she didn't invest in something that the return was much greater than the investment. So I think it's flexing that muscle for women to say, I want you to think critically about this. I want you to evaluate the decisions that are being presented to you, not just pros and cons, right? Pros, cons, what additional information do you need to make a good decision? What's your timeline for making that decision? Reviewing the documents, identifying the gaps. And I think we can kind of come back to that because I think that's a critical piece. Dialing in the data, learning how to become familiar with crunching the numbers on property division and support, making sure that things get finished properly. And then, okay, once it's done, the exhale is now what? Like, where am I going next? And how am I picking up the pieces and continuing to move forward? What's interesting, though, on the identifying the gaps is there's a lot of gaps. And we talked about the gap in knowledge and experience and confidence, but there's 2 other gaps that I find that women are experiencing. One is the income gap. Most of the people that have probably been listening to your podcast and many others, right, are like, oh yeah, we've heard of the gender gap, the gender income gap. And I don't necessarily want to really focus only on that, but I think there is certainly part of the conversation. As I was kind of prepping for our time together and I was jotting down a couple of things, and this is a bold statement.
Be bold.
I just don't think that for the purposes of divorce, that women who are staying home, that it's a badge of honor. We feel like as moms, it's a badge of honor, right? But when it comes to the divorce process, it's like, yeah, and I sacrificed. And they're like, yes, and.
Yes,
right?
and you get
yes,
nothing.
and you get nothing. Like, and I jotted down, I'm like, okay, I've worked with a 52-year-old occupational therapist who they said, sorry, you're going to have to go back to work. A 55-year-old RN, a 60-year-old veterinarian, right? And they're like, yeah, you're just going to have to figure it out. You've got the education experience. We know you're in there later in your career. We know you've missed, right, the really kind of probably pinnacle of your career, but guess what? You're going to have to work. And oh, by the way, we think you could make 100, 120, 150. What the heck?
Yeah, women, I mean, I've always, and this is consistent through my 30 years of plus of practice is, I practice most of the time in Connecticut, and there's written into the statute is this whole premise of non-economic contribution being part of the equation. So it says that in the law, but when I would, as a practitioner, as an attorney in the room, as a mediator in the room, as a person being a practitioner, you don't see the return on investment. And the problem is, I mean, and you and I both know it, is that income doesn't exist. The income that you gave up to go and be a stay-at-home parent and all the value of that did not translate necessarily into dollars. It may have boosted your spouse's income somewhat, and you'll share in that perhaps by way of support. But unfortunately, that's money that's now gone from your family pot that would have been earned during that time. And so although, yes, in theory, it'd be great to be able to make that up to you, there's no real way to do it.
Yeah. I know. And then the question is, okay, well, a lot of times people will say, do we go back to work? And I'm like, well, they're either going to most likely impute income to you and you'll have monopoly money to be playing with, or you go get a job and you have real money to work with. So like,
yeah. That was always one of my favorite questions as an attorney. Should I hold off on going and getting a job until after the divorce is over so it doesn't ruin my chances of getting alimony I'm like, so do you want monopoly money or do you want real money? So I was not one of the attorneys who was like, let's play some games around, you can't find a job. Let's get you set up for life.
Yeah.
By finding employment. Will it maybe be not where you want to be and you want to, ramp up? Absolutely, that might be. But then we can be talking about what retraining you need, what additional education you might need, what certifications you might need to get back to where you hopefully might be earning. But don't not earn as a strategy in your divorce process. Because I think your point here, especially for women who are listening, about perhaps having to get back into the workplace after an extended time away into a workplace. Face it, you and I both know we're dealing with it every day. The workplace has changed. It has changed in the last year, let alone the last however many years, ladies, you've been out of the workplace.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day too, Susan, it's a matter of backing into those numbers. It's not like, hey, we're just going to have the attorneys run the support calculations and it is what it is. There's usually a best and worst case scenario. There's certain levers that we can pull. We can be strategic, right? And intentional about really trying to help understand. But there is usually going to be income from multiple sources, whether it's support, alimony and or child support, whether it's, a job, right? Whether it's self-employed income, but we need to dial in based on their budget, current and projected expenses, and dialing in that number, right? And determining what they're going to need. And it's the same conversation for those that want to keep the house. Like, okay, well, what does the number need to be for you to keep the house? Not if, 99% of the time my clients can keep the house, but it is, again, working with a certified divorce lending professional, right? A CDLP, partnering with them. Yesterday, we had just a amazing strategy call. And I loved it. I was like, yes, this is exactly why we do this, right? Because you need all the pieces working together to keep the house, if that's your goal, right? Or not, whatever it is. But I mean,
or
again,
even to make the decision.
That's right. To back into some of those numbers and not just say, oh, well, here's the support calculation and no, I can't do it. Well, do we know that for sure? It's the other gap that I see, and I know that as an attorney, right, you probably saw this a lot, is the lack of transparency. So there is often a gap in that. And to help my clients kind of navigate through that on the financial side, I came up with an acronym because I love acronyms.
Me too. I love them.
And I call it the DAM method. And I'm like,
damn.
which is kind of playing off my bridge, right? It wasn't necessarily intended to be, but the dodging the disclosure, right? How many times have we seen that? Avoiding getting assets valued and then misrepresenting the information. And, there's times when all three of those things are happening, and it's making it very challenging for the women to determine if what's being proposed is a good option.
Right.
And they're being
that you didn't say if it's fair. You said if it's a good option. I'm sorry. I have to jump because I was like, oh my God, she's going to say fair. And you didn't. Thank you. If it's a good option. Yes. But it's hard to evaluate if you don't have values, right?
No, absolutely. And unfortunately, Susan, what I've been seeing, right? And again, I know you've seen this too, is people will come to the table, opposing counsel will send a proposal to the attorney who then just forwards it to the attorney or to the client and then says, hey, what do you think? And I'm like, well, how is this even possible? We don't even have full disclosure on any of the assets. The business hasn't been valued. We don't know what the value of the property is or multiple properties. And she's being asked to make a decision. And then it's, hey, if you don't make a decision within 24 hours, we're pulling the offer.
Right.
Well, then pull the offer.
We'll never make an offer this good ever
That's right.
Again.
Then pull the offer.
Just to really make it fun.
Like, this sounds like a ransom note. I don't know.
Well, and we're laughing, but let me say to the people who are listening, unfortunately, this is not unusual in the world of a litigated divorce i.e. negotiation between, attorneys. And one thing I want to point out to my listeners, because you've been describing this very well, and I want to make sure they understand the nuance of what you're saying here, is that when you're talking about evaluating, say, a proposal, and you're talking about the information needed to do it, you're being very clear about the financial professional working with the client to help the client have the layers of understanding of what they're looking at, what they're evaluating, so that the client can make the right decisions. And I think that that is very different from when we were talking earlier about the ostrich syndrome, or, well, I'm just going to let everyone else make these decisions. This is not the place in your life, everyone, when it comes to your future financial, health. This is not where you want to, say, even hire Rhonda, who's a wonderful professional, and say, Rhonda, you make all these decisions about where my finances should go in the future. You tell me. Yes, the financial advisor will advise. Your attorney is going to give you legal advice. Your financial advisor is going to give you financial advice. But what you're really talking about is so important, because it's talking about giving people that education so they make educated decisions. So important. Hi, listeners. It's Susan. I'm just jumping in quickly because I want to share an opportunity with one of our experts who is launching a much needed new program for those who are facing high conflict divorces and separations. Karen McMahon of Journey Beyond Divorce is launching her new Divorce Readiness Masterclass, Navigate Your High Conflict Divorce with Mastery. Good news here, it's free. So if you're emerging from a high conflict marriage where there's been a clear power imbalance and you've lost yourself in the shadows of your spouse's personality and you're feeling scared and uncertain of what to expect throughout your divorce, this masterclass is for you. It's a 1-hour jam-packed session. You're going to get all kinds of understanding of what to expect, as well as strategies and approaches that are going to help you calm the chaos, ease the conflict at home, and get ready to get through your divorce process. So to register, go to jbddivorcesupport.com/masterclass, or just go to the show notes and click the link that we'll have for you there. Stay tuned for more from Rhonda Noordyk to learn how changing your relationship with money can drastically improve your divorce outcome.
It really does take a team of people, to navigate through the financial pieces and come up with solutions that, man, we were, like you said, it's like, okay, we preserved the retirement, we paid off the debt, you freed up your cash flow, 500, and you kept the house. Like, yes, like this is such a huge win for her. Just awesome.
If you are enjoying this episode, be sure to check out last week's show with best-selling author, TEDx superstar, and letting go expert, Jill Scherer Murray, as she shares what you do and don't need to let go of and how you can get started doing it.
So we are afraid to walk away. But when we know our value and we know that we'll always be okay, and we know what we deserve, and we know what hurts us and what doesn't, we have a different sense and freedom that allows us to walk away.
And now we return to today's show.
Even folks that are in the financial space will send a bunch of reports and say, hey, what do you want to do? And I said from the very beginning, if I can help one woman, right, understand her relationship with money, I've empowered her for a lifetime, because every financial decision that she makes is she's now going to be able to run through a decision process that I've shown her, or a negotiation strategy method that I've shown, yeah, that's awesome, because I'm only with them, right, during the process and after we do a wrap up, and then I'm, started over with somebody else. So I have a 6-month, maybe 12-month window to really teach them how to think about money and improve their relationship, so that regardless of, what they do next, they're really feeling like, I got this. And they might even have some fun doing it.
Oh, fun around money? You were saying that so they can go forward and use this in all of their decisions. And I was seeing myself going through like my Instagram feed and going, oh, those are cute shoes. I think I need those. And then hearing your voice in my head going, but do you really?
I don't know. Shoes are my weakness. So that's maybe not the best example. Like, buy the shoes, girl.
I think life is short. Get the damn shoes. But and I live by that, right? So ask my husband. But I think that what you were saying is so vitally important. And it's actually, you know, I talk a lot on my show about divorce being an opportunity. And one of the opportunities is to change your relationship with money, to change your relationship toward managing your money and your financial future. And part of doing that is not turning over the financial decisions ever again to someone else, which is maybe something that has happened in your life, even if it's your financial professional or your lawyer.
Yeah.
Keeping the control, but getting the education, getting the experience, getting the confidence, which is what the other two will lead to, right? Is so vitally important and will change that path forward into your, you know, I'm always talking about the beyond on this show. You know, when you get to your beyond, being able to make those decisions from a place of financial empowerment and understanding. You can't take away all the difficulties, right? The fact that you've been out of the workplace, as we were talking about a minute ago, for 15 years, not going to be able to make that any easier. But the decisions that you make to go forward and how you go forward and the decisions about what's agreeable in your settlement based upon your understanding of what your future employment might look like or your income, that's where the power really lies, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. And, you know, and I think one of the examples that I was thinking of as you were talking, Susan, is I had worked with a client. She had worked so hard. Her husband was a physician. You know, she hadn't really been working outside of the workforce, well educated, like many of the women are, but just made that choice to, you know, stay home and support him and his career and their kids and all of that. And she went to go purchase a house after the divorce was over and takes a boyfriend with her. And he's directing the conversation. I'm like, no.
Like, am I in the house?
Like,
think not.
I need you to just go by yourself, you know, like, and just make those decisions without the noise, right? I think that's one of the things over the years I've gotten really good at is I don't want to hear the noise. And I give several examples. I know one of the things we talked about is I am coming out with a journal called Bold Beginnings. And the little bit of caveat behind that was I've written almost a full book and I felt like it was too heavy. And I'm like, I gotta take a step back. I'm not emotionally quite ready to go down that path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release something that's going to take some highlights from there. Again, another great acronym, and we go through the word confidence and map out each of those pieces. But we have to take this time to improve our relationship with money. And I think as people kind of go through these exercises that I've laid out for them, they'll realize, like, from an emotional standpoint around the money, I have a lot of understanding of things that they might be going through, the fear, the uncertainty, the shame, you know, and most of that, again, comes from my childhood. My dad was an alcoholic, addicted to gambling, still is. And it's just been a really challenging, you know, dynamic to see that. But I think I've worked through a lot of those things that now I'm in a good position to really be able to help women improve their relationship with money. You know, in the words of Kate Anthony, right? If they stay or go, doesn't matter, right? Like, you stay, you go. I want them to be empowered regardless of what direction they go. And this is just a great opportunity for them to be able to, like you said, lean into that and be empowered.
Yeah. Well, and that's so perfect. And what you're pointing out is, you know, even in a relationship that is where a couple staying together, the imbalance that is created in the relationship by one person having control over the finances and the other person not having that control, that is problematic in and of itself. In fact, as a divorce attorney, I can tell you it's probably the number one reason I've seen people end up in my office. There's also just the fact that spenders marry savers for some reason. I don't know. Have you seen a lot of that?
There's usually, yes.
Right? I'm like, what is it about, There's always, when they come through the door and they tell me finances have always been an issue, it's because one of them is a shopper and a spender, and one of them is a saver. It's like watching House Hunters. And every time you watch House Hunters, you see like one of them is like, our budget's $1 million. And the other one's like, I think we should stay around 250. And you're like, how did you two ever end up together? Right?
Totally.
But you see that all the time. And probably it should be somewhere in the middle. So a financial education and financial empowerment, even in a relationship that's intact, is actually something that only strengthens the relationship. In fact, do you ever do, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'll just throw it out. Do you ever do like premarital conversations with women around having the financial conversations going into relationships? Or?
I actually don't. I mean, I think the only time that probably really comes into play is if I've worked with somebody, as they were going through divorce and they're now entering into another relationship. And then sometimes we'll have a follow-up conversation. But no,
I mean, a whole new market.
I know, right?
I'm telling you, if more people had the difficult conversations and the education, right, got the knowledge and an experience to have the confidence to have the conversations as they were going into marriage, so they set up a relationship and a partnership that was financial equals, then we might see less of what we see in the divorce world.
Yeah.
But, let me ask you a question, because one of the things that I hear so often from my listeners, and this is post-divorce, and I see this as a sign who's someone who didn't get the best financial advice during their divorce. So what I see and hear from people all the time is they get divorced and they've negotiated a financial settlement. And you were talking, say, about being able to keep the house that allows them to keep the house, but basically they're spending every penny they have coming in for the duration of their support, right? So all the support, whether it be child support or alimony, that's coming in is going to maintain that household. And then those things come to an end. They don't go on forever. We know that. And they find that nothing was ever budgeted to like build retirement and maybe the housing market hasn't stayed strong. And so the house hasn't gone into equity. What part of, because we've been talking a lot about like understanding the finances now, but part of this is making good decisions about your finances going forward as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I think we do have a window, at least from the work that I'm doing, right? I have a window in which I can impact, right, some of those decisions and help them navigate through that. So when they get to the end, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm totally overextended, but unfortunately, I think that happens. And so I just feel like we have a window to make those good decisions before anything gets signed and is finalized. I mean, I had a client the other day and she was going into mediation. Sometimes I can be in those mediations, sometimes not. And I was not in this one. And she came out and said, hey, here's kind of the summary of what was going on. She wanted to keep the house, which was okay. Except the attorney was like, hey, you can drain the IRA account. You can do this, that, and the other. And so as we were kind of looking through it, I'm like, first of all, I mean, you're going to pay taxes, you're going to pay penalties. Okay, we know that, right? Are there other creative solutions that could be done to help you be able to stay there and free up? So we worked with, again, the CDLP and was able to free up about $585 a month positive cash flow for her while reducing her debt, while allowing her to pay the equity out to her spouse. And she did not touch her IRA. And I'm like, this, yay, right?
Right, yay! Oh, we're both applauding for those who can't see us, right?
But the attorneys in that situation, and again, they're looking at things from a legal perspective and just say, hey, yeah, you could do it. I'm like, yes, and, there might be some other things that we could do. And thankfully, I was able to connect with her and have a session with her prior to her signing the agreement, because if she would have already signed, one of the things that the attorney said is she had 60 days to refinance.
Oh.
Well, that's not going to work, because guess what? He's not been paying temporary support. That clock hasn't started, and she's not going to qualify on her own. So that would have been a huge problem. And she could have found herself backed up to having a, for sale sign in her yard because she didn't have enough time to refinance. And then usually it's, hey, if it can't be refinanced, then it's going to have to be sold.
Yeah. Go listen to the episodes with Tammy Wallens.
I mean, it's huge.
If you are wondering what we're talking about.
Yes.
But that's key. And that's what I think, as a mediator, I'm a divorce attorney, but I've been a mediator just about as long. One of the things that I know is that generating as many options, as many different ways to achieve the end. People always tend to see one way to get there. And what you just described was attorneys who saw one way to get to the conclusion you can keep the house, right? And what you came up with as the financial professional were options to get there that did it in different ways that were better options, right? Yeah. And that's what you can never have enough options on the table, everyone. If you hear nothing else out of this episode, it's when you think there's only one way to achieve what you want out of the divorce, look for other options. And if that means bringing in financial professionals or the other professionals that you're talking about, CDLPs, et cetera, do it, because it's when you have additional options on the table that you find, you just beautifully described it, a solution that achieved the same ends, except it was way better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think sometimes in those situations too, like, again, as a CDFA, I'm looking at current, I'm looking at projected. And my strength really is strategy. I'm always able to kind of like see the pieces, and the CDLP can bring in that expertise on the mortgage side. But a lot of times I'm the one who's kind of like doing, hey, can you run this scenario and this scenario and this scenario? Because I know how it fits into, the bigger picture. So it really does take a team of people, to navigate through the financial pieces and come up with solutions that, man, we were, like you said, it's like, okay, we preserved the retirement. We paid off the debt. You freed up your cash flow, 500. I mean, and you kept the house. Like, I loved it. I was like on a high yesterday after. I'm like, yes, like this is such a huge win for her. Like, just awesome.
And in the end, the money that was spent on having the professionals do the work that professionals do was more than made up by the financial gains. And people don't take this into consideration enough, but when you have a solution in your divorce agreement that works really well for both of you, you actually have a better divorce agreement. You have one that's going to be longer lasting, that people aren't going to, try to change. And you just walk away with a better feeling from the whole process. And you two are going to get along better. If you're co-parenting, you're going to have less conflict. You're going to be like appreciative that you worked this out in a way that worked best for all of you. It is a win. It's not just a financial win. It's a win on all fronts. And that comes from bringing the people to the table who can help to educate, who can help to generate options, so that you, the clients whose lives these are, who are going to go live them, can make the best choices. It really comes down to that in the end, right?
Yeah.
It's your choices that matter.
Yeah.
But you want to make those choices from a place of knowledge, experience, and confidence.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So one of the things that I know that you are offering to people, because, hey, in a half hour, folks, we're doing what we can always do, make you aware, get you a little excited. But what's really exciting is Rhonda actually has a free offer for a mini course for you that's going to take you a little deeper into this. So if you could share that with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So this takes people through 6 steps to get, and I got to use the F word, right? Fair. But here's what I will say about that. The fair piece is you get to define, it's not my job to define fair. It's really, again, kind of what we've been talking about is the client coming to the table and understanding their options, right? And they get to define what that looks like, right? And they're engaged in the conversation. And fair isn't 50. I mean, it's not 50-50. It's what are your goals? What are you looking for? And again, it really, the perspective with that is hinging on the empowerment piece, right? So I walk through 6 things that people can be doing to navigate through that. And I take them through just a high level of my bridge method to be able to help them, navigate through that.
Well, and I know you've given us a link for that, so I'm going to include that in the show notes, everyone. So just go to the show notes, or you can just go to the website, divorceandbeyondpod.com, and you'll be able to get the link, or sign up for the newsletter, because we always send out a newsletter with every episode that has all of the links in it. So those are your options for getting the links. And how can people get in touch with you, Rhonda?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place probably is the website, wfwcdivorce.com. They can check out the podcast. They can read some blog articles. They can just get a little bit better sense of what we're all about. And that would probably be a great place for them to start.
That it is a great place for them to start, and with the mini course. So I encourage you all to reach out. I will have all of Rhonda's links in the show notes. So please go there and get in touch with her. But thank you so much for having this conversation with us. It is so important to acknowledge the struggle is real, but also you can overcome it. And the other side, as always, the beyond will be so much better if you're empowered around your finances.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.